background of how Zechariah fits in. And Zechariah, in case you don't know where it is the next to the last book in the Old Testament. And it's a fairly interesting book because it has a lot to do with prophecy and the end times. And it's what the situation was is Zechariah, you see up there, is 520 BC. That would be approximately 500 years before Christ came. It was written right after the Jews came back from the Babylonian exile. So if you remember the history of that, Darius, I can't remember the Persian king made a decree and allowed the Israelites to go back to their land, but not many of them went. And the first group that went was under Zerubbabel, and there were only about 70 people, I think, in that group. And Zechariah was one of them, and Haggai was the other prophet at the time. So they went back to Jerusalem, and immediately they started building an altar. And the idea was which they finished in a while, and then they were going to build the temple, but they kind of stopped. And when they stopped, God didn't like it, so he sent these two prophets. Haggai is the older man, Zechariah is the younger one. And he tried to juice them up a little bit. And so he gave them, so Zechariah's prophecy is intended to encourage them, because here they are, they came back from exile, their temple was destroyed, Jerusalem is a wasteland, hardly anybody lives there, and they're working on the temple. The temple that was destroyed was Solomon's temple, which was an incredibly gorgeous edifice, and what they're building is not going to be as good. So they're kind of discouraged about that. So the Lord sent Zechariah, and basically what he did was he told them about the future. He told them what to expect. He told them what God's going to do. He told them that the Messiah is going to come. He told them that Jerusalem will be inhabited again. He told them about the end times when Israel will be saved. And one of the key phrases in there in the first chapter is comfort ye, words of comfort. So he wanted to give them words of comfort. The other reason for that is because if you know anything about Bible history, after Malachi there was what's called 400 silent years, where God didn't do any speaking, no books were given, and so forth and so on. So he intended to have them to have this in their back pocket, so to speak, as an encouragement for that period of time where there were no prophets and no scripture being written and so forth. You can give me the next slide. All right, so if you look at Zechariah, most of the Zechariah is a very encouraging book. It talks about, as I say, the restoration of Jerusalem, the city that as it will be after the tribulation and after the Battle of Armageddon. It talks about Christ being, Christ has a unique position. I don't know if you're aware of this, but he's the only person that is both priest and king. If you remember in the Old Testament, people like Saul, for example. Saul was a king, and he wanted to make sacrifices, which only a priest could do. Well, that was not a good thing. So anyway, it talks about that whole idea of priest and king. But chapter 11 is particularly a somber chapter because it talks about that, I gave you these first 10 chapters, and I told you what I'm going to do for you, Israel, but unfortunately, because you rejected my son, I'm going to put all that on hold. And it's been on hold even today. So let's get into it. So Andrew, you want to give me the next slide? Andrew, I need the next slide. Okay. All right, so let's look at the first three verses. And the first three verses are especially poetic. They're, in the Hebrew language, I guess, they're even more poetic than normal. And most Zechariah would not be known as a poetic book. A poetic book would be like Psalms or something like that. But these three verses, and in the poetry here, they use a lot of metaphors to stand for things. So in other words, doors stands for something, cedar stands for something, so forth and so on. But I wanted you to, so I want to read through those, and I've accentuated in red for a reason geography that's mentioned. So it says, "Open thy doors, O Lebanon, that the fire may devour thy cedars. Howl, fir tree, for the cedar is fallen, because the mighty are spoiled. Howl, O ye oaks of Bashan, for the forest of the vintage is come down. There's a voice of the howling of the shepherds, for their glory is spoiled. A voice of the roaring of young lions, for the pride of Jordan is spoiled." So you want to flip the next slide? All right, so what I have here is a map of Israel, and the arrows I have on here show you the places that they're talking. Somebody say something. What? What? My mic? Oh. Sorry. All of a sudden I heard it. So, did you hear anything I said before? Okay, on this map, this is the only one I could find that had those names on them. There's a little bit of an echo, but anyway, had these names on them, was the top arrow there is approximately where Lebanon is. It's Mount Hermon, the Lebanon mountains. The second arrow down is Bashan, which is currently where the Golan Heights is, which you hear a lot about the Golan Heights in Syria and so forth and so on. And the last arrow is the Jordan River. And the Jordan River basically runs between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. So you see that whole area there from the blue spot up there. So basically, what's indicated here is something is going to start up in Lebanon. He says, "Open the doors," and it's going to move down through the country. It's going to move down, not in a good way either. Move down through the country from Lebanon to Bashan, all the way down the Jordan River. So what is this? Well, most. I should preface this by saying prophecy is definite, but it's not necessarily for us to know everything about it. So I'm going to give you what I feel is the best opinion of what some of these things are. Obviously, I've checked references and so forth to do that. Most of these things are pretty thin concept, but there's a lot of tendency in prophecy to take every word and make something out of it, and that's not nearly necessary, nor is it good, I don't think. So I've tried not to do that. But anyway, so what does this refer to? Well, it refers to an invasion. And the invasion, if you know anything about Israel's history, every time Israel was invaded, the enemy came from the north, irregardless of what the enemy was. In the final battle of Armageddon, all the armies of the world will come across from the north, meaning Lebanon. So that's what this means. It means that some kind of force came into Israel, came down from Lebanon, through Bashan, all the way down, eventually to Jerusalem, and completely wiped out Jerusalem. The best explanation of that is the Roman invasion of Israel in 70 AD. And however, the other thing about prophecy is that, and you'll find this in Zechariah repeatedly, he will give you either something that could apply in a more recent time. So in other words, this the AD 70 is approximately 600 years after Zechariah is talking about it. He can give you something that's in a more recent time, and you can also give you something in a far time. So in other words, the end days type of thing. They'll talk about that day, meaning the day that Christ comes back. So that is the way this is. Primarily, primary reference would be to the invasion of the Romans in 70. But it also has application to the final invasion during the Great Tribulation, after the battle, or during Battle of Armageddon. Okay, Andrew, give me another slide. All right, so the open thy doors, as I said, these things were metaphors, and basically open the doors because everybody comes in from the north. So the doors means open the borders. So open the borders and come in. And also means that all the protection up there is gone. So in other words, the army's going to come in, and that's exactly what's next. Okay, next, Andrew. Unfortunately, I did this. Why don't you go? Give me another one. because I did this in order, doing it myself, it's easier. Is there another one after that? No, go back. Okay. So I just described each verse in order, and so you could take notes or whatever you want to do there. So he's saying a fire may devour, basically meaning that they're going to burn the trees down. And the idea there is not so much that they burned the trees down, which I think they did, but also that they devastated the whole country. It's kind of the idea of the scorched earth policy, which Nazis did in World War II, where they just destroyed everything in the path. The cedars. Okay, so why would he mention the cedars? Well, Lebanon is noted for cedars. That's it. When you think about it, it's the major economy of the country. Also, the cedars were important in the Bible times. They were used by Solomon in building the temple. So to say the cedars is like saying, we wiped out the White House or something like that. In other words, we came against the essence of the country. So the fact that they burned the cedars down, that whole place is devastated. Okay, give me a couple more, and I'll do one verse at a time. Give me another one. See, do I have another one there? Yeah. Okay, so then it says how the fir tree were also used in building the temple. I have the reference up there. 2 Kings 15, 634. I gotta make sure I don't run out of time here. In other words, when the cedars tall ones came down, well, the fir trees are going to come down too. But they were also used and mentioned in Solomon's temple. It may also be significant of the fact that they mentioned cedars and fir trees because one of the whole purposes of this is eventually they're going to get to Jerusalem, they're going to destroy the city, and they're going to destroy that temple. They're going to destroy that temple that Solomon built with the cedars and the fir trees and so forth. So how? First of all, he repeats that. This is not exactly. It's a fairly severe form of desperate cry. Mighty or spoiled. When they say the forest. There must be another one on there. Is there another one on there? Andrew? The next one? Yeah, I thought so. It says the mighty are spoiled. The idea there is spoiled has the idea that shredded to pieces. The word is shredded to pieces. So in other words, all the words he's using here, and again, it's poetic, but all the words he's using here indicate extreme devastation, extreme destruction, and so forth and so on. The forest of the vintage has to do with the fact that at the northeast you had all these beautiful forests, and they act kind of as a protection. And they've been there for a long time. So the forest of the vintage was basically indicated that your protection is all gone. Okay, give me another couple. Is that? No, go back. Okay. All right. So the third one says there's a voice of the howling of the shepherd. Okay. Now there's some question about what they mean by shepherds. I felt that the best way to describe that is basically Israel. We had the fortune of being there and being drive through the country. What you're seeing is shepherds even today taking care of their sheep. So in other words, a lot of the country is used, especially at that time, for that kind of activity. So the shepherds would be upset because they burned up everything and probably the sheep were not too good shape. The other issue with shepherds is that shepherds, and we'll get into that later because he uses that word again. Shepherd is a significant word of the Bible. Shepherd normally, we look at the Lord Jesus is the good shepherd, and we look at our pastors and so forth and so on. Shepherd is normally a representative or leader, some kind of person like that. And he's talking there. Before in the previous chapter, he talked about the false shepherds, people that were leading Israel at that time. And so the howling of the shepherds also could refer to those people. That's another one of these things. How you want to interpret it. Pride of Jordan. This is interesting. I didn't realize I heard this before, but I didn't realize that after I think the Israelites went into captivity, I think the Assyrian captivity or may have been the Babylonian captivity. The land was fairly desolate, so that the vegetation along the Jordan River got real thick, and so then wild animals in there, and they had lions in there. This is also mentioned in Job, I believe. And so the pride of Jordan would be a group of lions that lived along the Jordan River in its thickets. And they're upset because the Titus and the Romans are going to come in and they're going to burn all the thickets up and they're going to lose their homes. And young lions particularly particularly important in the sense that when they're young, they're more aggressive, they roar louder and so on. So again, everything he puts in here accentuates how bad this is. All right, give me the next one. All right, keep going. Is there another? No, go back. All right. So now we have something interesting taking place here. In which the Lord, anytime you see L-O-R-D in capital letters, that refers to Yahweh. Then this is Zechariah talking, of course. And he says, "Then saith the Lord my God, feed the flock of the slaughter." So what is he talking about? Well, one device that's used in prophetic books is role playing. And one of the so what he's asking Zechariah to do is to act out what he's telling. So I'm not exactly sure how he did this, but he's acted out. One of the best examples of this is in Ezekiel. Make sure I pull this correctly. Mine goes blank when you don't. Yeah, Ezekiel. And Ezekiel, what he commanded him to do, I don't remember some of these things. He commanded him to take this tile and draw a picture of Jerusalem on it. And then he had to put battlements around it. And he had to lay on the ground for so many days representing Israel and so many days representing. These are all in. If you want to read this, Ezekiel chapter 4, verses 1 through 17. Then he only ate bread and water, minimal wages for a while, minimal food for a while, to kind of indicate the fact there would be starvation. So in other words, he acted out what was going to happen. So it was kind of strange to see him walk by and lost his mind or whatever. But that's what he was doing. And that's what Zechariah is doing here. So he says, feed the flock of the slaughter. So what he's doing here is he's mimicking what Jesus Christ did. So he fed the flock, and that means ministered to them. So the idea was when Jesus came the first time, he had a ministry for 3 years. He fed the flock. Preached to them, healed them, and so on. So what a normal shepherd would do. But why does he call them the flock of the slaughter? Well, the idea there is he realizes because their rejection of him, they're going to be slaughtered. And I'll explain that in a minute. But they're going to be slaughtered. So he says, but I want you to feed them anyway. That's what Jesus did when he came. So it's just the ominous reality of the fall of Israel doing the slaughter. 1.5 million. I'll talk about what happened as a result. All right, go ahead. Give me a couple. Okay. So then he says, possessors also interesting. These are all very interesting concepts here that Zechariah goes into. He says, whose possessors slay them. And as I say, if you didn't have some kind of help with this, it would be very difficult to understand what they're saying. But I think it's really significant. You also got to realize that Zechariah is saying this 600 years before Christ appeared. Okay, and so it's incredibly accurate prophecy, quite a bit before the time. So he says, whose possessors slay them. and hold themselves not guilty, and that they say, Blessed be the Lord, for I am rich, and their own shepherds pity them not. So let's talk about the possessors. The possessors in this case represents the Gentile nations. And so if you remember, God used the Gentile nations to judge Israel. He used the Assyrians to come in and the northern tribes and wiped them out. He used the Babylonians to come in, carry them off, and so forth and so on. But they went a little too far. And so they were a little bit more, they were more vicious than God wanted. So he says, I'm gonna deal with you over that. But what they said was, they knew that God was using them. And so they said, well, blessed be the Lord. I look at what I did. And I'm rich. So they took advantage of the situation. They sold the people into slavery. They stole things out of the temple and so forth and so on. There's examples of this, as I say, of Assyria and Babylon. Jeremiah 57 and 30:16 says that, yeah, you did what I told you to do, but you went too far. And they made money. For example, tens of thousands were sold into slavery after this invasion in AD 70. Now, their own shepherds, again, the word shepherds appears, and this particular case refers to the leaders of Israel. So who were they? Well, they were the wonderful scribes and Pharisees and the high priest and so forth. Those were the leaders of Israel. If you remember, at this particular point, Israel was under Roman captivity. They did not have a king. Okay, they were, in fact, they were continually fighting to try to get free from Rome and so forth and so on. So their own shepherds, they didn't care for them much. Okay, they only cared for themselves. In fact, in just resisting the ministry of Christ and so in resisting Christ, they didn't care for the people. So their own shepherds pitied them not. So here they are. These people are coming in to attack them, selling them off. They're gloating about the fact that they could do this. Okay, give me the next couple, Andrew. Okay, so this is particularly severe. For then God says, I will no more pity the inhabitants of the land, saying the Lord. For lo, I will deliver the men, every one into his neighbor's hand, and into the hand of his king, and they shall smite the land, and out of the land I will not, and out of her hand, I can't read it, I will not deliver them. All right, so God is saying, look, my patience is ended. And this has happened several times in Scripture. Everyone into his neighbor's hand. Okay, what he's indicating there is that not only are there going to be problems from without, but they're not going to get along with each other, and they're going to fight with each other. Especially when the Romans came in, Titus surrounded the city of Jerusalem, and there was intense starvation going on. Even cannibalism took place as a result of the people were eating their own children and so forth and so on. So the idea of men into his neighbor's hand. The other aspect of that is when Titus sent the force down here, they weren't Roman soldiers. The soldiers that he used were soldiers from the lands around them that he captured them. And they were like Syrians and, whatever, Lebanese and all these other people around them. They hated Jewish people. So the idea delivered into his neighbor's hand could also refer to the fact that these were the neighboring countries, and they're going to take them over. And so he's not going to spare his own people. Okay, go on, Andrew. Give me a couple more. Okay, now this is also interesting. And this is Zechariah saying, I will feed the flock of slaughter, even you, O poor of the flock. And I took me 2 staves, the one I called beauty, and the other called bands, and I fed the flock. See, to some degree, you're depending on me to explain this, because it is a little bit, hidden. All right, so he says, so Zechariah said, I'm going to go ahead and feed the flock, And so he said, I will feed the flock. And at the end of the verse, he says, I fed the flock. So he's talking about the fact that Jesus Christ, he went ahead and fed the flock. Okay, he did what he was, and Zechariah acted this out. Interesting statement is, O poor of the flock. Okay, anytime you see the word poor in the Old Testament especially, it refers to someone who's at the bottom. Okay, they're not just financially, but also maybe health-wise or whatever. And the idea is in the verses like, blessed are the poor in heart, for they, I don't remember them all, but there's a lot of verses in the Beatitudes there where it talks about the poor. In this particular case, the poor of the flock refers to, as I said, needy, weak, afflicted. It's invariably used in the Hebrew Bible of the pious or godly who are persecuted by the godless. So in other words, the poor of the flock represented the people who were saved. Okay, so Jesus came, and Zechariah is saying, look, I'm going to minister to these people. They're the poor of the flock. And he's going to have two staves. And so here he's acting the part of a shepherd. So if you remember the two staves, if you remember Psalm 23, thy rod and thy staff. The shepherd, an Israeli shepherd, normally had a rod and a staff. Now the rod, see if I can remember this right, the rod had more to do with protecting the sheep, keeping away enemies and so forth. The staff was the one with a hook on it, I believe, and which he would come rescue the sheep. In other words, the sheep get off someplace, he'd bring them back together. The idea of these two words, so they're used to protect the sheep against enemy and inward strife. I meant the fact that this is a little bit of a stretch to compare this to Psalm 23, but I think the fact that it's also very common in those Oriental times for the shepherd to carry a rod and a staff. Okay, Andrew, any of the next ones? Oh, go back. Okay, so he has these two staff, and one is called beauty, and the other one is called bands. Okay, so what is he talking about? Well, beauty is basically grace. Okay, it's favor, graciousness, and so forth. So he's saying that Jesus is going to extend grace to people. The poor of the flock are the only ones that are going to receive it because they received him. So he's going to minister his grace and goodness to men and secure men's relationship with God. In other words, he's going to provide a way of salvation. Bands has to do with getting people together. And so the idea there was it's a relationship between man, and in other words, keep the country together. After the Roman invasion, the country was split so badly that no two Israelis were next to each other, kind of a thing. And I'll talk about that if I have time, which I should. So he took the two staves. Give me the next couple slides, Andrew. Okay, that looks good. All right, then this verse is basically one of the more difficult verses to explain, and that's who are the three shepherds. Okay, there are approximately, I read when I was reading about this, there are approximately 40 different interpretations of what this means. So I'm going to give you the oldest and what I feel makes the most sense. All right, first of all, what are the three shepherds? Again, you got to understand the context. In the context, shepherds is referring to false shepherds, refer to bad leaders and so forth and so on. He's talking about shepherding the flock. Christ is your good shepherd and so forth and so on. The best explanation of is the shepherds represent three offices, not particular men, three offices that were present that ruled Jerusalem at that time. Now, the main three offices historically in Israel were prophet, priest, and king. Okay, so at this time in Israel, we're talking about Christ's day, not Zechariah. He's projecting ahead to, this is referring to Christ's ministry and so forth. He's talking about prophet, priest, and king. Now, There were no prophets. If you remember that when Christ was there were no prophets, okay? But they had scribes, and the scribes kind of took the place of the prophet. They wrote the word down and interpreted the word. Sometimes they added their own interpretations and so forth. There were priests and there were elders. Okay, so these are the three groups that he's talking about. He's going to cut them off in 1 month. Okay, so what does that mean? That means they're going to be gone. And basically, when Christ came and the temple worship was basically dissolved, if you remember, the veil was broken in two and so forth and so on, these offices totally ceased. There was no more priest anymore. I mean, they have individual, Jewish congregations have their, I guess, rabbi, they call them now, but there was no main priest and so forth. So what he's saying, he's going to cut them off, meaning by what I do, by my crucifixion, my providing salvation and so forth and so on, these are going to be cut off. We're going to do away with them. And they're going to do it in 1 month. Now, there's various interpretations of what the 1 month means, and I didn't really want to even go into that, but basically what I would say is he's going to do it in a short period of time. I like what one fellow I read said, 1 month is longer than a day. In other words, it's a reasonable period of time, but not a very long period of time. And so you can look at it, well, Jesus was only here for 3 years. So in terms of the length of the history of Israel and so forth, that's a pretty short time. All right, then he talks about, and this is another reason why these three shepherds, I think, are related to these three offices, is he says, my soul loathed those three shepherds. Okay, well, there's repeated verses where Jesus talks about where he openly rebuked the scribes, the Pharisees, for their hypocrisy, their whitened sepulchres, their wickedness, and their rejection of him. So the one there, Matthew 23, 13 through 15, is an example of that. But the other thing is they didn't like him either. And so they said, their soul abhorred me. In other words, and they didn't like him to the point that they put him to death. So I think in that context, that makes a lot of sense. All right, Andrew, you can give me another couple. All right, there you go back. All right, so again, this is God telling Zechariah what to say, but this is what Zechariah is saying. Then Zechariah said, I won't feed you. That dieth, let it die. That is to be cut off, let it be cut off. And let the rest eat every one the flesh of another. Then said I means that this is the judgment that Zechariah is pronouncing as he portrays, as he plays Christ, so to speak. I will not feed you. Okay, what happened when the Romans came? They surrounded the city and nobody ate. Okay, so it was big famine. Let it die, let it be cut off. There was tremendous amount of bloodshed. People, I got some numbers on that, but we'll get to it at the end. And then let everyone eat the flesh of another. There was cannibalism. People ate their children because they were such starvation. Basically, I don't know if I have time for it, but what happened was he surrounded the city. They were starving. People tried to escape. When they tried to escape, the Romans would catch them. They would crucify them, and then they would place them around the city so that you looked out if you tried to escape, you saw your buddy that just got crucified hanging there. Pretty gruesome. Anyway, okay, Andrew, you can give me another one. Is there another slide on that? Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, this is another one that could be easily misinterpreted. So he says, and I took my staff, even beauty, and I cut it asunder, that I might break my covenant which I had made with all the people. Okay, the key words here are all the people. All right? So it seemingly, if you looked at this, you'd say, well, he's going to break his Abrahamic covenant. That was an unconditional covenant. In other words, he walked through the pieces of sacrificed animals. It was guaranteed by his person. God guaranteed it himself. So he's not going to do that. The key word is all the people. The people here refers to Gentiles, not Jews. The word is used. It's not the Abrahamic covenant or any of Israel's unconditional covenants. The word in the original refers to Gentile nations. So what is it? Well, if you remember, God said, I will bless those who bless you, and I will, I forget what, I should have put the verse up there. But what he's talking about is basically stated by Moses in Deuteronomy 28, 1 through 14, in which God promises to protect Israel from attack from without. So basically, it's kind of like an unconditional covenant that he has with the other nations. In other words, I'm not going to let you attack them. I'm not going to let you destroy them. But there were cases he did that because when he judged them. And so the beauty, so he breaks the first staff. So he decided that was a symbol of God's protection over them, and so he's going to do away with that, and he's going to cut it asunder, meaning it's going to be completely gone. Okay, go ahead, Andrew, give me another couple slides. Oh, we go back. Okay, and it was broken in that day. So the poor of the flock that waited upon me knew that it was the word of the Lord, which this was a really good verse in the sense that it was broken in that day. That day, again, in prophecy, refers to the immediate, being AD 70, but it also can refer to Armageddon, the day that Christ comes back after the Great Tribulation. So that day, and again, these things can have two meanings. All right, I'm applying this mainly to the Roman invasion. For the flock, again, those were the those that accepted Christ, the ones we talked about before. So what happened to the poor of the flock? Well, they saw all this happen. They saw the Romans come in and so forth. Many of them were killed and so forth. But they waited on the Lord because they had a faith in God, and they knew what he said in his word he was going to do, which I thought was a really just an incredibly encouraging verse. So the poor of the flock that waited upon me knew that it was the word of the Lord. In other words, you should know, we should be able to wait on the Lord and know that whatever happens, it's going to be according to his word. And that's what sustained these people in this terrific, upheaval to their country. Okay, Andrew, give me another one. All right, now this gets more into the Easter part of this. So this is Jesus acting out. I don't know if I'm going to get through all this, but anyway, we'll do what we can. Jesus again continues to role play, and so he's as prefiguring Christ. He says, "And I said unto them." Okay, so who is them? Well, them had to be the unbelieving nation of Israel. And what he's asking, he said, what am I worth to you? Okay, what am I worth to you? He says, if you think good, give me my price, and if not, forbear. Okay, so the fact that he's asking for his price indicates that he knows his ministry is coming to an end, and he wants to know, what have I been worth to you? What's my price? And if ye think good, he's saying if ye think good, implies that he's not holding out any hope that they think very much of him. So expresses a lack of confidence they will do right by the Messiah. And then go ahead, Andrew, read me the next slides. Okay, so then he says, if not, he indicated his expectation that Israel would fail to value Christ at all. And the idea is Isaiah 55:34, we esteemed him not. Okay, so he says, well, what do you think? And so you can give me my price, or you can just do nothing. Forbear means just do nothing. And so what they did was they gave 30 pieces of silver. And so the idea was when Judas turned Jesus over to the priests and so forth, they gave him 30 pieces of silver. 30 pieces of silver has a significance in the sense, in Exodus 21:32, it's the price to be paid if your servant was a slave had been gored by an ox. So you had a slave, it wasn't even the price of a slave, it was a slave that basically was somewhat incapacitated. So we're talking about an incapacitated slave, and they're saying that's what the nation, that's what the unsaved, the Jews at that time viewed Christ as, the 30 pieces of silver. And of course that refers to Judas and the whole thing. This is remarkable in the sense that it describes exactly, we'll see in the next verse, it describes exactly what happened 600 years before. Okay, give me the next slide. And then the Lord said unto me, so that God says unto him, cast it to the potter a goodly price that I was prized at of them. And I took the 30 pieces of silver and cast them to the potter in the house of the Lord. First of all, the idea that he said it's a goodly price is a sarcasm. Obviously, he didn't think that. Obviously, that's not what God thought. And he cast it to the potter. The potter's interesting here because the potter works with clay. So he basically works with things that are worth nothing. And he makes vases and so forth and so on. And if the vases break, we just throw them away and then the potter makes another one for you. So he's basically saying cast it to the potter is the idea of throwing away something of little value. So he's, the fact that they gave the 30 pieces of silver to the potter deals with things that are made of earth, hence of little value. And in the house of the Lord, which is exactly where it happened, solemnizes the event. In other words, it didn't just happen out in Joe's backyard someplace. It happened in the house of the Lord. So it solemnizes the event and makes it an event that's remembered. And Matthew quotes it. Unfortunately, fortunately, but what Matthew quotes is he says that it's predicted by Jeremiah and not Zechariah. And there's some, and I won't go into all that, but the idea, if you read the passage, Matthew 27:3-10, it'll say as predicted by Jeremiah the prophet, which he does. Jeremiah the prophet's the only other person in the Old Testament that mentions the potter, okay? And in that particular case, it was the idea of destroying Jerusalem and so forth. So it's related. So the idea is that I don't know whether it's first mentioned or whatever, he goes back to the person who first mentioned the idea, even though it was re-mentioned again by Zechariah. I'm gonna have to clip it here. Andrew, why don't you go give me a next couple. All right, I just want to go to the end here. Okay, I guess we only had one slide. Well, just go back to that one. Go back. Okay, so then I cut asunder the other staff, even bands. Okay, so the nation of Israel had been together, if you remember, under David, some degree, Saul, David, and Solomon, even though there was a rebellion of Absalom, which is in 2 Samuel. Ezekiel had promised in the previous book. You got to remember what these people are hearing. So they were promised this nation is going to stay together, and so they're hoping to see the nation stay together. But the nation is going to be totally broken apart, and the joining of the nation together, again, as I say, all those promises await Christ returning, await the nation of Israel seeing him who they pierced and accepting Christ as Savior. So all those are in abeyance. Give me that last slide then, Andrew. Okay. So what happened as a result of Israel's rejection of the true shepherd? Well, first of all, when I talked about they surrounded the city, I talked about the fact there was over 1 million Jews died, nearly 100,000 were enslaved. the soldiers took over the city of Jerusalem, plundered it, destroyed it by fire. The destruction of the temple occurred exactly 40 years after Jesus predicted it will, and it was so destroyed that he mentioned in the verse there that not one stone on top of another. That's exactly what happened. The other key to this was the inhabitants of Israel were scattered all over the world. This has been called the diaspora. If you have the opportunity and you're in Washington, D.C., to go to the Holocaust Museum, it's an incredibly description not only of the Holocaust, but what happens before it, how the Jews were separated, the persecution they endured in ghettos way back, and so forth and so on. And of course, the Jew has been kind of downtrodden, persecuted, no country, but he's existed as an entity. Most nations like the Canaanites and so forth, they were wiped out. Who knows where the Canaanite is? But you can go find it. You can go find where the Jews are, and they're still using the same Bible, and they're still doing the same sacrifices and all this kind of stuff. But in the kind of the climax of that occurred in World War II, in the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were murdered. And as a result of that, the Jews started going back to the land of Palestine. Really a miracle how they got that land back. One other thing I didn't mention was that there was an attack. The initial attack was at AD 70 when it was destroyed, but it was a second attack. The Emperor Hadrian came in 135, and he destroyed a whole bunch of cities and so forth. And he decided to take the name Israel off the map. So in AD 135, there was no more, after that, there was no more Israel. It was called Palestine. So that's where you get the Palestinians and all this nonsense we put up with today. But until 1948, it didn't exist as a country. Anyway, I just thought, Andrew, you want to show the last slide? I just thought that, what are the results of Israel's rejection of the true shepherd, and what are the results of man's rejection of Christ? Sorry I went over a little bit. Hopefully it was beneficial. Pray. Father, we thank you so much for your word. We thank you for your promises. Thank you for this book of Zechariah and the truths that it holds. Bless the service to follow. In Jesus' name, amen.